This video is about a few different things. First of all, a couple of ways you can be found at fault in an accident when you really haven't done anything wrong. First is my driveway, where my wife was backing out. I mentioned it in another video. She was backing out to the west in order to head east, which meant backing, never used to mean this before they put this roundabout in, but now it means backing across 2 lanes, missing a traffic island, and then making a hard right turn, because they widened the sidewalks and they put an island directly opposite one side of our driveway. So I warned her, this is too dangerous to do this kind of thing anymore. You shouldn't do it. So the next day when she was leaving, I watched and she did the same thing again. Fortunately, it's the last time she ever did it. She backed across the first lane, past the island, looking both ways behind her very carefully, that no cars were coming, and she didn't hit the island. She backed across the first lane into the second lane, and a woman came from the block behind us. She drives an old Ford Fiesta from the 80s, and she no longer has to stop at this corner. So, as she does every day, she came flying around this corner. I saw her hesitate because she saw my wife backing up into her lane, and she thought, she could have stopped a few times in that distance, but she decided, well, I can make it if I step on the gas. So she did, which was totally the wrong thing to do. However, in the event that they had collided, my wife would have been 100% at fault. Simply by ICBC's rule, she was backing up. So, right or wrong, this is what can happen. With a witness and fighting ICBC and climbing their chain of command there, you may have gotten a 50-50 split on this. But there's no advantage to that. So why even bother? Another way involves a car that was parallel parked. This is a fellow I met at the Coquitlam Claims Center years ago. He parked, when he parked, there was no other cars on that side of the street. When he came out from wherever he was, there was a car right in front of him and another one right behind him, inches away from each. So he couldn't get out of his parking spot. So he couldn't find the drivers of those vehicles. So he got in his car and he started inching it backwards, forwards, slowly working it out of the parking spot. He got halfway out of the parking spot, a guy came driving along and just drove into the side of him. So, he came out from the adjuster. The adjuster didn't ask me anything. Should have, but he didn't. And I said to the fellow, you have no witness, obviously, because if you did, you'd have some kind of case. And the adjuster should have come out and asked me if there was any indication on your damage that your vehicle was moving or not. And anyhow, there is no indication here that you weren't moving. If you had been sitting and they hit you, you've got yourself a real good case. But I can't prove that by your damage. And there's no witness. So it's your word against the guy who just drove into you. So that's the second way it can happen. The third way has nothing to do with collision. And it happens more often than you think. Now, you may not ever hear about this even in your lifetime, but when you work in a claims center, you're going to hear about it quite a bit. What happens is a house is broken into, they find keys, there's a vehicle in the garage, and they steal it with those keys. The vehicle is recovered with damage, and ICBC will pay, or even the house insurance, I would imagine their policy is the same. They all operate under the same set of rules, the Insurance Act. They'll replace your keys. If the vehicle's recovered and the keys are gone, they'll replace all your keys and they'll pay for all the other damage, but they will not pay for rekeying the things that those keys fit. Now, by ICBC's own teaching, when I was an employee there, they said their job was to put the person with the claim as close to the position they were prior to the claim. Well, I would assume that prior to the claim, there wasn't some scumbag walking around with your keys and address in his pocket. And that is a very real possibility after this scenario happens. So I think that's completely unfair. I don't know how they get away with it. And just another thing that ICBC does that's wrong. And how ICBC cheats you. Now, I'm just going to spend a minute going over something because it's important and because I want to get some ICBC employees involved in what I'm doing here. I'll talk about where this website's going in a minute. First of all, I spoke about how accelerated depreciation cheats so many people, and how the adjusters are committing fraud by getting people to sign off on the claim early before they can realize that their vehicle's value has been lowered considerably by the accident. It says, this is Wikibooks, Canadian Criminal Law Offenses, Fraud. Fraud is not defined in the Criminal Code. The basic definition requires elements of dishonesty and deprivation. And I believe ICBC does both of those very well. Dishonesty is determined on an objective standard determined by what a reasonable person would consider dishonest. Now, I think I'm pretty reasonable, and it sure sounds dishonest to me. Dishonesty can also include non-disclosure where a reasonable person would consider it dishonest. Actual loss is not necessary. It is sufficient to show a risk of loss. And that's what they're doing with accelerated depreciation. Deprivation includes the risk of deprivation. So they're depriving these people of the potential full value for their vehicle, what they would have got had it not been in the accident. Now, this isn't for people who caused the accident. You have a contract with your insurer. This is for people, the innocent victims of collisions and other things. But here's the one. This is why ICBC employees, especially adjusters, had better start getting involved here. If even one of you knows about my website, you better start passing it around. And I'll say this first. Merely following directions of a superior or employer is not generally a defense. Now, that's why you adjusters have got to be concerned. And ICBC, they don't care. You know, when I was an estimator there, I think it was around 89 or 1989, 1990, our contract was up. And one of the things us 375 estimators in BC wanted was protection from being sued for calling for used suspension and steering parts on repairing vehicles. ICBC's policy required that your vehicle is used, the steering and suspension was damaged, those parts were used, we're putting more used parts on it. We're not going to put new ones on if we can find used ones. Well, us estimators were the experts, and yet they didn't listen to us when we said we don't feel that a lot of these parts we're putting on are safe. And if you insist that we call for these used parts in the repair, then we want protection from being sued in the event that they fail. And, you know, an accident is caused. Well, we were only 375, a very small percentage of the total number of employees in BC for ICBC. So the contract was voted overwhelmingly in favor of what the company offered, and we got nothing. So we were still hung out there by ICBC to be sued. So adjusters, this can happen to you as well.